China is the first large emerging country to grow into middle class living standards. Now, their middle class there, 12,000 GDP per capita, is not even a fraction of our middle class at 60, 80,000. Okay. But that was a huge thing. 1.4 billion population moving from poor to middle class in a few decades. That's why it's such a miracle. Problem is, China cheated. China basically overstimulated their economy. They just told developers to build houses and we'll eventually fill them. Now they have 22% empty houses with a real estate bubble that makes the US and Europe look like nothing compared to incomes, the valuations. And so China's going to have the biggest downturn ahead. And the problem is when they come out of it, they're the first emerging country to start aging rapidly because of their one-child policy. And now they've lifted the one-child policy. Guess what's happening in China? Nothing. Chinese realize, oh my God, we're better off because we only had one child. Having 2, 3, 4, we'd be bankrupt. And so that's happened. Affluency always means fewer and fewer kids. And so affluency always peaks at some point because people have less children and because they want to educate them better and make them better. So it's a positive and natural motivation. But this is what causes a positive trend to change to negative. Now, my difference, and it's very simple. From the beginning, I'm a cycle guy. Cycles always peak. It doesn't matter what says, but this is going to go better. AI is going to change everything. Yeah, but at the top of the cycle, you got to shake out all the excesses from the last cycle before AI is going to have all these impact. And before the next generation comes along and drives us, we have to shake out the downturn from the last generation. So to me, cycles are everything. And I studied all modern history. William Durant, The History of Civilization, 10-volume of everything in modern history that mattered since the agricultural revolution started 8,000 years ago. That was my textbook, and no economics course has that, and nothing will beat that. I could see cycles from thousands of years down to what we still have is a decennial cycle. You watch, first 1 to 3 years of every decade ends up down, and every other one ends up down more, and every other one after that ends up down more. And I finally discovered the biggest driver in modern times was the generational cycle of people growing up, entering the workforce at 20 after great expense in society and earning and spending more money till 46 to 47. That's the biggest thing in the world. And no economist still, after I've been preaching this for 30 years, understands it, which says they're dead. In the family life cycle, peak in spending is 46, moving towards 47 in most developed countries. But real estate peaks first. You buy your first house about age 28 and your trade-up home, your best home, around age 42. So you're buying that before the peak. You go back to the Roaring 20s, the Henry Ford generation, the peak in housing was 1925. The peak in the economy was 1929-30. Okay, well, that was that 42 versus 46, 4 to 5 year difference. So housing is the most important, not only because it's the biggest expenditure, but because it's the most leveraged. That's where we borrow the most money, but it also means when housing goes up and crashes, it's the most deadly. This is the only and biggest real estate bubble of this magnitude in all of history. Roaring 20s did not even see a real estate bubble of significance. It was only a stock and business bubble. This is the big bubble to unravel because most people now can afford a home. And a lot of people have not only bought their home with leverage, but they've also said, well, I'll buy another house or two for speculation. So a lot of people, and in China, that's the thing, Chinese, more than any society, not only bought their inexpensive family home, the typical China family that has any wealth at all has bought 1 or 2 homes sitting empty in an overbuilt economy with 22% empty homes. How does that scenario end? China's going to see the biggest bubble burst in all of history while everybody in the West is worshiping China. Oh, if we could only be like China. You know what China doesn't? They have capitalism, okay? They embrace that. They don't have democracy and accountability of the government. The government has stayed in power by building stuff for nobody, expecting sooner or later we'll fill it up. That's how they've kept people from revolting against their absolute power. China's going to go down more than any country in history in the next several years. And people are going to say, I thought they were it. Number one, everybody's anti-immigration, okay? If it weren't for immigrants, and I'll tell you, as a business owner and entrepreneur, if I had a choice between hiring a legal or an illegal immigrant, which one do you think I would choose? The illegal, because they had to take more risk and try harder to get in, okay? I mean, that may sound horrible, but they're more innovative, okay? Immigration is the only reason we're still growing faster than most of Europe, especially Southern Europe and other parts of the developed world. And Australia makes us look like nothing because they're getting the highest educated, most qualified immigrants from Asia into their country. Immigration is a great thing. Of course, you have to have a strategy around it. You can't let anybody run across the border, which we have done more. Australia has the best immigration policy in the world, not because they're smarter, because they were just naturally sitting in a place where Asians come up and they contribute, okay? And they start businesses, all these things, okay? And Australia has the best forecast into 2100, longer than I and anybody listening to this will even think of living, because they're going to continue to attract second world, borderline first world Asian immigrants, high quality, into a first world economy that's almost as rich as the United States and the best parts of Europe. So Australia is the Western country that has the best future for as far as I and anybody listening to this or their kids will live. You can predict this today. People say you can't predict the future past the next election. No, long-term trends are incredibly predictable. Anything could go wrong. Trump could get shot. Think of all the things that could happen to affect the next year or two into the next election and stuff, and the election and blah, blah, and who went. Next 20, 40, 50 years, piece of cake from my point of view. Everybody owed China to think, no, China's already peaked as a country and will plateau as they get a little more urban, but their demographics are the worst in the world, just second to Japan and South Korea. All of East Asia is going to die in front of our eyes in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And nobody would suspect that. All you got to do is look at demographics, crystal clear. I expect gold is peaking here around 3,000. Will go down in the next downturn. The biggest factor driving gold will not be its monetary value in the future. China and Indians love gold for investment and consumption. It's a small show of wealth for people that aren't that wealthy and are getting more wealthy. I'm telling you, gold is going to go to at least 5,000 in the next decade or two, and God knows what after that. But gold is probably peaking here around 3,000 near term. So if it goes back down maybe 40, 50, 60%, next boom, it will be the best single commodity in the world. First of all, this is an everything bubble burst. All financial assets, real estate, stocks, everything, most commodities. Okay. Gold is doing what it did into 2008. It is continuing to rise in the early stages of a downturn. It will eventually go down only for a short period of time, as it did in late 2008. So I'm telling people gold is the best safe haven in the early part of the crash, which means now, if I had a choice between buying the treasury bonds, which are the ultimate safe haven in a crash, as they were in late 2008, I would hold or buy gold here. It'll do best in the first, maybe say, year of the crash. And then in the last year or so of the crash, it'll be treasury bonds, because when everything goes bad, gold eventually went down about 40% only in the second half of 2008. So gold and treasury bonds were the two best safe havens. Gold in the first half, treasury bonds in the second half. So that's why I'm telling people I'm into gold now more and transitioning into treasury bonds what we have to see, by the way, a first crash that is 40% or so in this year to say we finally topped and we're going into a longer term downturn for the next 2 to 3 years. Once that happens, gold is still the best safe haven, I'd say, into 2025. As we go to 2026, 27, then the treasury bonds, TLT, average 20-year treasury bonds, 10 and 30, that becomes the best. So I would start with maybe 80% gold, 20% GLD, 20% TLT for the treasury bond, and I would switch to the opposite, 20% gold, 80% TLT into the second half of the downturn. And of course, I'm gonna have to gauge that when it happens. I think this is gonna take 2 years minimum, 3 years maximum to shake out.